But how do you guys feel then about Deathwish in general? I'm going to talk about Deathwish in terms of RNG. So things like Arcaspores, the fact that they hit random opponents, and also the fact that they hit something random when they die. So the 4 damage Deathwish, sometimes you're only hitting a 1, and that, I think, actually can be quite impactful in a tournament setting, especially when you queue into, say, a curse deck. If you're against a curse deck where damaging your opponent randomly could benefit them, you want to target those cursed units. You don't want to be hitting the non-cursed units because that's giving them extra power on their Berserker Marauders. Do you think that kind of RNG is okay? Do you think it could be tweaked? What do you guys think?
It's definitely pretty minor RNG, all things considered. I remember back in the day when Arcaspore was revealed. A fun fact, it is the card that says the word random in it most times. In the entirety of Gwent, it says random 3 times in its description. And everyone was freaking out because it said the word random 3 times, and people get triggered by the word random. But in reality, it definitely does have less randomness associated with it than, a lot of cards that, we see like Elven Scout or Slave Driver. I think it's the kind of RNG it is mostly okay because it takes a pretty niche situation for it to end up mattering, unlike something like Slave Driver or Elven Scout. What do you guys think?
Well, you have to have you have to command the mastery of the Arcaspore. You have to speak to it, be like some type of Larry whisperer in order to get that kind of RNG on your side. And I'm well known for having really shitty luck, at least when it comes to everything but the Larry. So I've actually had some games where, like Jaggerous was saying, where that 4 damage sort of gets tossed in the wrong area, where you're losing value onto a 1 or onto armor or something along those lines. And sometimes there's no worse feeling than playing a Larry as your first play on blue coin, and then just immediately they toss down like a great sword where you're just saying like, oh, you're working against me. It's the worst feeling, but I mean, it's manageable RNG in the sense that, I mean, it's very rarely that a card doing random damage like a Treb or your Larry is going to really hurt you in the long run.
Yeah. Especially because there's not really that much armor, and not just in the meta, but typically there's relatively few units with armor.
Right, but if you're knocking out armor, it's not the end of the world. You're just losing a point of value, which is fine. It's when there's a greatsword or like a marauder or something along those lines. That's when it becomes an issue. But I haven't seen a marauder reliably in a while. Greatswords come and go with the meta. They're either really popular or they kind of make way for other types of archetypes. But I mean, GameKing could probably speak better to meta analysis and stuff like that. But like, GameKing, when do you see a Larry and you're just like, fucking get this out of my face? I hate this thing.
I want to say something about the Arcaspore. Let's say you play Alchemy, and then the 4 damage lands on a Slave Driver, for example. Like, it does not only deal 3 damage less, it also enables your ointments, and then you can maybe bleed longer or do something else. So that's can also be more impactful this way. And yeah, I think in the meta, the Marauders are in the, I think, Tailbot played the King Brand Marauder deck in the Open, for example. So yeah, I think it's either Great Swords or King Brand with Marauders, in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay.
I think they're generally fine in the game. The problem kind of arises in tournaments, I find, when, admittedly mirrors come down to kind of draws a lot anyway, but I feel like the Deathwish mirror comes down a lot onto whose Arcaspores hit the right targets and whose Arcaspores don't hit the right targets, because your Arcaspores can really enable your graveyard in that matchup and your opponent's graveyard. And if you can kill their Arcaspore and then they get the 4 damage onto your Arcaspore, it becomes more killable, and it can kind of come down a little bit to quite largely to chance. Whereas in a mirror, I feel like skill's really kind of viable because they don't have the counter. So then usually it should come down to who plays their cards better. But in that case, it maybe isn't always the case. So it's one of those things that I'm just kind of aware of as a thing in Gwent, I guess.
Yeah.
And sometimes sorry.
Okay, 3 of us start. GameKing, go.
Okay, and sometimes like you mentioned the trebuchet as well. Like if you play Hansel, then you have a Scotch in the hand, and then you winch, and then you get the trebuchet. You have to think twice. Do you want to go with this? Because sometimes it can. Let's say your opponent has double 13. Then it hits the 13, it goes to 12, and then your Scotch will suddenly only be like 13 points instead of 26, and that's, always...
And it's math that I don't even want to touch, so...
Can also screw you over.
I wanted to ask you guys, I guess how we all feel about the meta right now, because obviously, like, a lot of people are saying that things are kind of a bit dry because there hasn't really been a major content update. A lot of people end up, for those people that don't end up playing Arena, the Arena update was huge for anybody who enjoys it, but for a lot of players that just like playing ranked, you get 10 cards. Triss Telekinesis is an interesting one. I'd love to talk about that one in a bit. A lot of people are kind of, basically waiting out for like a big content update. But I actually think that despite being pretty dry, the meta is in one of the better places that it's been in. There is a relatively healthy diversity, particularly compared to a lot of things we've seen in the past. And actually most of the top decks, I actually think pretty much all of the top decks right now require a pretty decent amount of skill. I mean, in the past we've seen like some, a lot of like monsters and Skellige decks and Squirtle decks that have required like pretty low skill, all things considered. But all of Hansel, Alchemy, and Greatswords are all do relatively take some real decision making.
No, I would tend to agree with that. And the only thing that I don't like necessarily that kind of impacts the meta would be things like faction challenges. And I think faction challenges themselves are really great for the community and whatnot. But I just don't like the fact that a game that tries so hard to balance themselves in terms of giving the community various options, 3 or 4 solid options to compete up to Grandmaster. And then what they do right after making all those efforts to balance and having all these viable decks is they give incentive to really hone it down to 1 or 2. So that's what really kind of tarnishes it. I think that I don't want to go off on a tangent here about faction challenges because one just wrapped up. But I mean, as soon as faction challenges hit, I just tend to avoid ranked because I don't want to see, 4 Henselts in a row and then 3 Dagons in a row, so to speak. So I thought that the meta as it existed right before Faction Challenge was fairly decent. You had about 3 or 4 top tier decks, if they're piloted correctly, that can bring you to Grandmaster. And then below that, you had other options if played properly were decent. But is it stale? Possibly because there hasn't really been anything, like you said, Swim. There hasn't been any content update or balance changes for people to sort of shake it around. So even though there are 4 or 5 options to really have decent decks, down the line, those 4 or 5 options do get stale.
Oh, yeah, don't get me wrong. Yeah, no, I do think that the game is in a stale spot. Like for those of us that play the game very regularly, it's absolutely stale just because there hasn't been a major update. I think Triss has definitely shaken things up quite a bit for, the amount of impact one card can really have. But yeah, no, it's absolutely, I'm definitely looking out for a major content update.
So to Faction Challenge, I would like to see them removed from the Pro ladder, maybe even from Ranked.
Yeah.
Because on the Pro ladder, if you, as you said before, suddenly there are like 3 Hensels in a row or some random Dagon, and some players maybe get an advantage out of this because they just like hit the right time to queue this or this deck and then win a lot of games because of that. And some may like get quit Gwent for 1 day because they lose against Hensel on coin 3 times in a row. So the Pro ladder is for the pros, as it's named, and not for the Faction Challenge.
I mean, that's the only reason I don't do Pro ladder and kill everybody on that thing is because of the Faction Challenge. I mean, otherwise I'd be on there tearing it up, but I don't because I mean, it wouldn't be fair.
I mean, who wants to play against 80% play rate Hansel? I gotta say, I did see a really ridiculous amount of Hansel for like that, like kind of week period or so. And yeah, I actually agree with you. I think this is something that I mentioned before in another episode of this, but basically, I was saying that the Faction Challenge system can only really be healthy for the game if it's kind of already imbalanced. Like if there's 2 or 3 really good factions and then 2 or 3 really bad ones, then you can choose the bad ones and then rebalance it. But if you assume the game state to be balanced, it does kind of end up doing more harm than good. I do like what it's trying to do in terms of, freshening things up and making 1 week feel different from the next. But maybe they can look into doing that in a kind of different style of way.
Yeah, I don't mind faction challenges in the Pro ladder. Not in the Pro ladder, sorry, in Ranked ladder, but I think they do have an impact on Pro ladder because if people then, start queuing to play the faction challenge and you start playing a counter, you can get that kind of win streak. And a large part of the MMR on the Pro ladder is about finding those win streaks. And that's why people complain that, the people who play a million games have an advantage because they're more likely to find the streaks. saying that, I quite like the faction challenges as something that exists. I think they kind of maybe force you to play or get you to experiment with decks that you wouldn't necessarily play before, because getting 30 plus wins with one deck gets a bit tedious after a while. So then you're like, fuck it, I'm playing Monster Shoop, and that's always a fun experience, I would say. But ultimately, the meta at the moment, I'm feeling a bit eh. I mean, we haven't had any huge changes in that since December?
Yeah.
And it's now coming up for the end of March, and they've said that we're not going to get any big changes till April, I believe, or there's not meant to be a big patch.
Have they said that?
Well, I've heard that people have been saying that balance changes, that there's not going to be big balance changes. I don't know. I don't think I've heard from people in Gwent saying this. I was talking on stream and someone was like, oh yeah, no, CDPR are going to not do anything big.
But is there really any just huge egregious imbalance issues at the moment? I feel like they've really addressed a lot of them, and it's what is the one offending card or the one offending archetype that's really just blowing it away? This isn't like we're in another dwarven kind of wasteland where it was just really, really bad at the time. Spy abuse was kind of complementing the fact that the meta was just terrible and overpopulated with one archetype. So are we really just at a point right now where we're still in that, I don't want to call it a honeymoon phase, but we're still at least feeling the relief of being out of that meta, that we can't identify that it's imbalanced? Or are we just legitimately just in this part now where the cards are actually in a good state? They might kind of be boring maybe to a degree, that a lot of the cards are pretty much copy pastes of each one other. Yeah. 6 do 5 or 5 do 6 damage in that sense. That was 11-point cards. But are we really in a state where it needs a balancing, or does it just need new content?
Well, the game is very balanced. It's in one of the most balanced states that it's ever been in. But really, I think it's important to understand that balance is really kind of a means to an end. And the end is diversity. Now, you see a good amount of faction diversity on ladder, but in reality, it's very fair to argue that, the playstyle diversity, for example, might not be diverse enough. We've seen more diverse playstyle options in the past, and there are a few decks that feel like they play a bit similarly to others, for sure. I mean, that's kind of the real question, because the game is balanced. It's just, there's still a lot of problems in it. Like, for example, there's stuff like the coin flip does feel bad, and stuff like certain decks that are able to capitalize off of it, cause it problems. There's definitely some non-balance issues, I would say.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is not the balance of the cards. I think the biggest problem is the coin flip balance, in my opinion, because you in mirror matches, you see it's the best. If you Hanseled mirror, you have to dry pass, right? Because otherwise you maybe lose an even or go 2 down, and then your opponent dry passes again, and then the last round begins, and you have to go first. And what's happening there? Your light cavalry will never come out, and your opponent's light cavalry will come out if you go 20 points ahead. And that's is the coin flip in Hansel is very important. Same with the Brewer mirror, the coin flip use deck, which Swim thankfully made for us.
Thankfully.
I was saying earlier, I don't think that deck is the best deck in the game, but it really you get a psychological victory over. You make them feel so terrible. It's just so awful.
Yeah, the thing is, even you can war dancer round 1. You even don't know if you have won the coin flip, and then if you win the coin flip, your opponent can't even dry pass you. So you can also play around the dry pass by playing the war dancer.
So Swim is still sustaining himself on the tears of thousands of Gwent players who have just been abused by that thing. He's just. Do they send you their tears in a jar? How does it work? Do you just bathe yourself in their sadness? I could just only imagine the amount of dreams that you've just completely eviscerated in your time, Swim.
There would be in my opinion, there would be 2 ways to fix the coin flip. Either fix the cards that are better or worse with the coin flip, remove War Dancer, Light Cavalry, those 2 cards, or try to fix the coin flip in some other way with give the starting player 5 points or some other stuff. But I think War Dancer and Light Cavalry delete those cards, please.
Delete.
So, luckily, CDPR has indicated for the first time in a while with the Burza AMA that they were looking into coin flip solutions. This is, of course, a huge relief for us because, it was not a couple months ago when they said it kind of wasn't one of their biggest priorities, and it looks like that has kind of changed. And I want to talk about how we feel about the proposed solution that they were tossing around, which was the kind of initiative idea. This has been something that people have talked about. For those of you guys who don't know, basically something they might, just kind of casually said at AMAs, one solution they were thinking of was the idea of having each leader have a different initiative stat, and that determining, obviously leaders would be balanced around it. Leaders like Henselt and probably Bruver would have lower speed, so they would be basically more likely to be matched with leaders that go first by default. I'm curious what you guys think about this solution, because it's getting a lot of flack, but it's also kind of interesting, and there's a lot of discussion to be had about it.
I'll let GameKing go first on this one, man.
Yeah, GameKing, This is all you, buddy. I'm suspecting that you and I agree on this issue, but I'd like to hear what you say first.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, no, I can tell we agree. Okay.
But I'm not sure if, then you go with, let's say the leader that has the worst initiative, then always has blue coin, no matter what happens. And then honest in the mirror, I think it's
unless there's leaders unless it's initiative tie. I mean, we don't know what the granularity of initiative will be.
Well, okay, and then there's a leader with only red coins. So I'm not sure if that works out, but the basic idea is really good in my opinion. But what I thought for a long amount of hours is, what if they just add 5 points to the player that goes first? That was requested by a lot of players 1 year ago and everything. But why?
Okay, so I can actually answer this question, GameKing. So the reason why they haven't done that is because since the coin flip is a larger issue at higher MMR levels, a solution like that impacts all levels equally would end up skewing the balance of the coin flip in the reverse direction at lower levels, right? So a solution to the coin flip, because the coin flip is a larger problem at higher levels and a smaller problem at lower levels, to balance it at higher levels without making it worse at lower levels, any solution needs to scale with player skill. It needs to have some kind of input or control. For example, the coin in Hearthstone, while not a perfect solution, is actually something that good players are a lot better at using more effectively.
Okay. But they should just test it. I think it's 6 points. Half a spy should be the perfect number.
I think it's I like the idea that they're proposing with the initiative. I think that's honestly a decent one. And I mean, GameKing's played in these tournaments where the coin essentially has been predetermined, and people have built decks surrounding that. So I think that it's going to essentially go towards that, where the leaders are going to reflect where abilities are going to be either are going to feed off of going second or first. And someone with, let's say, a low initiative number, meaning they'll have more likely have the blue coin go first in matches, will probably have a more powerful output over time, whereas the red coin or those who tend to always go second will have more or less of a immediate impact, let's say. I think it's a really, really smart way to do things. It'll also play in a lot to what the archetypes and different cards that you can create surrounding going first, going second, reactive cards versus more proactive cards. Someone who's going to have a blue coin on them most of the time will tend to have more cards that, probably more engine cards that grow over time versus, let's say, a red coin deck that has more damage cards, stuff that'll be able to be more control oriented. So I think that down the line, there's a lot more to think about purely than going first and second, because it'll have a lot more gameplay elements sort of hidden into the code of it, so to speak, or what they really want it to be down the line. I like it. I honestly do, because it's something that's, and you can anticipate and play into, and then sort of tailor your deck around that and feed your opponent, or sorry, feed off your opponent of. If you see what your opponent's, if you know you're going first or second, you can tailor your gameplay around that as well. But I mean, I'm definitely one who thinks that the coin flip is something that definitely needs a immediate or somewhat, and it needs addressing like now, like yesterday almost, because it's obviously just. It's so offensive to get blue coin 6 games in a row where you have no chance almost. So let's just get working on it right now. Put the PTR out tomorrow kind of thing. Let's get going on it.
It needs to be fixed before the game officially gets released.
Yeah, well, who knows when that's going to be at this point, right?
This
2077.
year,
Yeah.
right? I think they said this year, right? 2018.
Did they say that? That might have been something that they said.
I feel like you just say that whenever someone says, "Didn't they say this?"
Did they
like,
say
Did
that?
they say that?
I don't know if they said that.
So I have no idea what they've said at this point, so I'm just gonna question it all. I mean,
And they also
how do
said
you
Storm Break.
how do you do this whole initiative thing though, right? Because I feel like initiative works when leaders are tied to very specific deck archetypes, but when they're not, when leaders aren't tied to archetypes in the way of stuff like Bruva and Ithne, a lot of Square leaders, for example, how do you rate them?
Elders so far. I mean, yeah, sorry.
I was gonna say, and how do you incentivize people to play low initiative leaders?
Yeah,
the ones that have to go first.
By giving them mechanics that have, you know, a little bit more of a right off the bat, you know, big punch, in my opinion.
Yeah. I was gonna say that's a great point, Jaggerous. Like, probably almost half the leaders in the game are not really designed around any specific archetypes. I mean, for example, Great Swords works really well with Crack, but Crack is designed to work well in multiple, and it's very much the general purpose kind of starter leader. And the same is true of something like Calvite, even though, you know, it does fit the playstyle of Alchemy.
It's a tricky one. Like without a huge overhaul, I'm not sure exactly how it's going to work. But then they did say that they wanted to give, you know, each faction more identity and have like 3 distinct archetypes per faction. So if that's something that they're working towards, this goes kind of hand in hand with that.
And I am very much looking forward to that.
I guess we'll have to kind of see how it is that they implement it. And I know GameKing was saying give everyone 5 points, but then what's to stop, you know, whoever goes first just dry passing?
But isn't it?
It's dry passing with 5 points.
It's the same dry passing, right? Because I mean, it basically, and any card you play is going to be worth more than 5 points.
In some ways, but like at the moment, like if someone dry passes, you have the option of a tie. I mean, I don't think you usually take it, but you're kind of removing that option. And I think like giving points to the person going first can almost like reverse the coin flip, because as soon as that person just passes, like the situation is kind of the other way around, but you have to play at least 5 points, which means if you're playing certain decks, there's even like cards that you can't play because they're not worth 5, and then it gets a bit confusing. So there's a lot of kind of solutions that people have proposed.
That guy would never pass, right? That would be the same as now, right?
Yeah. I mean, the only difference is there's a handful of cards that, you know, I mean, for example, earlier today, I used the Vico Varomedic against the dry pass. There's very minor options that you wouldn't really.
You can also not get screwed over by Wardens, for example, or just in general, the player has to get something out of the losing the conflict, because your opponent can just let's say you have like 2 or like 3 big dudes, and then you get ignite. If you lose the coin flip, yes, you lose an even then, or you go 2 down. If you win the coin flip, yeah, okay, you just pass, and then it's like you dry passed, right? Yeah. It's like and if they get the 5 points, then maybe they can still pass because they have like 5 or 6 points. Because of that, they maybe can still find an opportunity to pass. So, but I think nobody would like then always dry pass.
See, it's just one of those things where we've been discussing it now for, you know, like the past like 5-10 minutes, and we've already decided that, you know, maybe the 5 points is not necessarily the best or fairest option, and that's I mean, the people who are developing the game, CDPR is looking at all these options, and I think that they think that they see that initiative might be the best way, but it's also the most complex and the most game redefining down the line. So I think that it's not an easy thing to do. Hearthstone has the coin, which is great, but it also has a mana pool that that one coin is not going to have a reverberation over the rest of the game because there's no rounds. It's just you know, it's a completely different win condition.
And the coin is very far from a perfect solution. It's just, you know, it's there.
No, because depending on what you're playing there too. Sometimes if you can just coin out something huge on turn 1, the game could be over in Hearthstone in a heartbeat because you're playing from a position of huge advantage right off the bat. It's definitely something that needs a lot of work, and I think that the initiative solution needs to be tested to the T, but it might be the closest thing that we have to a perfect solution. It just happens to be the most work intensive, and you know, so people are not necessarily all that keen on something that's going to take a long time to fix, that's been such a problem for so long.
I do. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, GameKing. No, it's all you, buddy.
I think it's I think it's a good way to fix it, or a good way to try to fix it. the first thing I would do is then pick the leader with the highest initiative and try to build a current abuse deck.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good thing that they address those things and try to fix it in some way. And yeah, I hope it will get fixed. And yeah,
I know for a fact if they do implement this idea, I will be going very far out of my way to try to abuse it as much as possible, because any leader with high initiative, you find the one that's like the most abusable, and you design a deck around always being able to go second, and that's a really big deal potentially. I mean, you can generate a huge advantage. I think how I would summarize my thoughts on the initiative system is that I am skeptical, but I do really like the fact that it does add A, an additional layer to deck building, and B, an additional kind of stat for leaders. And there's even been, people talking about potentially having initiative as a stat for all cards or something like that, which might be a little weird.
Maybe they could also add cards like maybe like a bronze with like 10 power only, but +1 to your leader initiative or so, and then you're more likely to go first. It's like some deck building leaders.
Interesting.
Yeah. That's a cool concept, actually, where the deck itself, it could
that
just create
definitely can't be a bronze. They would have to put that on a silver.
Yeah, maybe silver.
They would have to. Don't get me wrong. I actually don't mind the idea, though. I mean, obviously, it would have to be faction limited and probably silver or gold, but I kind of dig it. I can see it if they're
like
going to.
Siri Nova forces your deck to be 2 cards of all the bronzes, right? And then there's like maybe a card that is very bad, but
it's a very finicky solution. I kind of have this suspicion that it's going to be kind of tricky to balance, or might create some additional problems, and obviously on top of solving some others. But if I'm wrong, and I do actually hope that I am, because it's a very interesting solution. If I'm wrong, then absolutely, it adds some extra layers to the game, which is very cool, especially as a deck builder.
Thinking about it, I'm kind of liking the initiative thing less and less, because it's kind of going to shoehorn you into playing certain leaders. Like,
but we're
at the
now
moment, you can play any leader.
We're just assuming that all the leaders have the same more or less power level to a degree, right? But what if the leader that's always going to be on blue coin, or one of the lowest initiative leaders, what if he had a base power of, let's say, 15 and drew a silver from your deck, let's say? You're always going blue coin, but you have this monster, and that's obviously a huge exaggeration of what a card could be. But I'm saying, what if he was just that much more powerful than everything else? Would you still overlook it completely? That's what I'm saying. Like, maybe down, what they're looking at is not just the initiative number, but the power levels of the leader are going to reflect what those initiatives can be. So you can have this giant leader that's humongous, hugely powerful, but he's just going to drop on blue coin every single time.
Yeah. And in fact, they kind of almost have to do that, because right now, apart from the create leaders, which are kind of intentionally left at a lower power level, the leaders are all relatively balanced. And that's, of course, an intentional design decision. When you add in this additional factor, it means that they want to use this as an opportunity to actually skew the balance of the leaders intentionally, just like you're saying.
And before this goes, before people clip this and say Flake's out of his fucking mind thinking there's a card that's going to be 15, draw a card. That's not what I'm saying. I was using it as an exaggeration. That's
the big, powerful.
Flake, that's already been said. I'm sure you're responding to it. That's
for sure. That's exactly what
leaders would have the biggest speed. Create leaders would have 100 speed and always go.
Well, that's another bit of the tricky thing, because right now create ones are the weakest leaders, but they did that on purpose very much. They specifically didn't want the create leaders to be played outside of arena. And that's kind of weird, because that means that they can't necessarily give them too high initiative, because then they're maybe the most competitive ones. So
I also had an idea to fix the create leaders. I think it was Coleman who had the idea, make the create leaders as with restore. Let's say you play the other, you discover a random cursed unit, right? And then the cursed unit goes to your hand, and then you may play it or play a different card, so that you are not forced to play it immediately. It was also not a bad idea to maybe boost or buff the create leaders a bit, and then it's like with restore, you can restore a unit, right? And then you play a different card. Just make the same with the leaders. Then you discover the adrenaline rush, for example, but you don't have a big unit. You can just get it to your hand, play a unit, and next turn you cast it on that unit, for example. So you are not forced to play it immediately. What do you think about it?
So clearly, so we can all agree that it's a complex solution. So
it's like restore solution on leaders.
Yeah. It's not an easy thing. So maybe the only thing that really bothers me is the fact that obviously this has been a problem for so long, and we've gotten to the point where we've added so many cards and so many different game types, and there's pro ladder now and there's everything. This is probably something that should have honestly been looked at a long time ago. And every time that there's new content added, that there's new game mechanics thrown in, it only makes the solution more complex and more complex. But so, I mean, here we are now. Let's get it done now before things get even bigger. There's more expansions, and I think that's what we can all settle on and agree with, right?
Yeah, and I mean, luckily we have confirmation that they're looking into it at this point.
Woo!
Just, that's
looking into it.
So anyway, one thing that I really do want to talk about this week, because this is something that has been a bit of a topic for debate, is Triss Telekinesis. Now, this card has taken ladder and a plethora of decks by storm. Some people are saying that it's healthy for the game, while others are saying it's too close to an auto-include level across like a ton of different decks. And I'm very curious how we all feel about it. Some people say it's totally fine as is, maybe should be bumped down to 5, maybe should be reworked, or maybe stay as is and then the game kind of tries to be more balanced around it. What do you guys think?
I don't mind it. It's okay.
I mean, I don't really play the card that much. It's been in a few of my arena decks. I think it's not bad. It definitely is a card that you want into archetypes that have played things like Winch, or like if you surrounding a lot of frost or weather or whatever, you kind of shoehorn it into something that requires you to play it. I like it, and a lot of people have obviously found a lot of use for it.
It's really good with recon.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? It's an extra thin, it's extra units. It's almost like a Dandelion Poet where you play it and you get an extra card, you play something with recon, right? It's a really good card, and I think that people need to stop calling something that people play regularly OP. It might not just be completely OP. It's a gold card. It has to have a certain amount of power to it. And how much power is it really generating?
Yeah.
Like, 18, 19 on a high end, let's say, depends on what you're pulling from a recon. But at the same time, I mean, there's gold cards that do more than that. So what are you really complaining about? Yeah, it could get it toned down a point or two, but I think the card itself from a design aspect is actually pretty good. And I think that the Gwent really benefits when they come up with cards that have good, obviously good and unique designs like that. I don't want to see it go, but maybe the point tweak by maybe 1 point less or 2 points less might be in order. But at the same time, if Dandelion is 5 and draws a card to play, then why isn't this something along this? Why isn't this 6? Because it only takes a bronze special, right?
Exactly. And there is a bit of RNG associated, although most people would say it's basically create done right, because it's a lot more controllable and it adds an extra layer to deck building in a way. Right. I'm very curious what you have to say about this one, GameKing.
Yeah, I think it's a really good card. You can almost compare it to John Natalis in neutral, because I think you can almost add a recon in every deck and then just put it in. So if you have only 3 good gold cards, then just slam 1 recon in, slam Triss in, and then it's good. It's good to go. You can also sometimes maybe high roll a bit if your opponent staggers everything in 1 row, and then they play Lacerate themselves, and then you get the Lacerate, and then you completely devastate them. So their opponent have to play around their own bronze cards, basically. And yeah, I think it's a very good card.
Yeah, it can give you some information.
Should get tossed 1 or 2 down, maybe 1 point less.
1 point less.
Maybe make it to 5 points, so it's the same as Dandelion. But I think it's fine. But maybe it's a bit too good. But only maybe by 1 point.
I gotta say, I think the card is great. Personally, obviously, I don't just mean that competitively. I mean in terms of design and health. Now, the one downside I would say of the card before I get into it is basically that it can maybe limit many competitive it can skew more competitive archetypes towards ones that have kind of good bronze options. It's definitely a good improvement towards archetypes like Moonlight, which of course I've kind of felt like they've needed a bit of help in that way, and it just gives you great versatility. I think it's very healthy. And honestly, I don't really think it needs a change. I think it's one of the best design cards in the game.
I agree with you on that one for sure. From a design aspect, it's really, really good.
No,
Yes.
I'm very happy with it. There's just a ton of options, a bit of information, a little RNG, and it just adds layer to deck building. I'm pretty happy with it in the update. I mean, it as a single card is able to just do so much in terms of the meta, and obviously, like, you know, it does impact deck building to a degree just because it can incentivize you to really run something like Recon in that way as well. Now, I think the biggest complaint people have is with this card's play rate, but because it's kind of different in every environment, it has a different function in every deck. It's kind of okay that it's a neutral card with a really high play rate, right? Like, for example, someone was saying before, why aren't all the runestones just a neutral card in the same way that Doppler is, right? And if so, that card would have a really high play rate, but it'd be different in every faction. And Triss is kind of exactly like that. So it's totally fine.
Because if they made one runestone, then they'd only have 104 cards in the big patch that we have. Like that. But I kind of agree with you, actually. I never really thought about that. Maybe they just want different colors, you know, for fun. I don't know. I think she's all right. Triss is all right. I think Yorvith is all right as well, but people don't like not Yorvith, sorry, Imlerith, because it's very binary. It's a win or lose kind of situation. And I guess Super JJ can show us that, because I think Lurt's prepared a clip. Wait,
are we playing it?
We're gonna play it, I think.
Oh my god.
I think we're gonna show people how to Imlerith featuring Super
production
JJ.
value.
Well, unless Lurt's lied to me. No, I don't think he lied to me.
No, he's fooling around down there. He's doing something.
There we go.
Okay, I would pause.
He's fooling around down there. He's doing something.
He's off camera. We don't know.
Yeah, but basically, as you can see, you just play Imlerith with 9 cards in hand on round 3, and then you pass, and that's all you do.
Now. Enjoy the show.
Take a sip. Swim knows how to do this.
Now, where was he on his arena run with this?
No idea.
Because if this is like your first game, you've got all your lives left and whatnot, I would definitely do this too, just to, you know, dick around. But it's hilarious, because now, if you don't have an answer, this is what we're all getting at, right? Is that if you don't have an answer, it's the most painful thing. That's gone, right? It's just like, that's gone. And it only gets better with... Oh my god.
Did he play all of his cards, or does he just forfeit? Oh, just forfeits. Oh dear. Okay. What do you dab?
What if the pass was genius? It stopped his opponent from finding an answer with Chillard. He might have actually increased his chances of winning by passing there.
Yeah. You meant to play 1 card round 3 and then pass. Or do what I do, is play 1 card round 2 then pass, not realizing that the first round was a tie and that you didn't actually win it. Yeah, I did that the other day.
I don't like the card.
I like this
card.
Why
don't you like it?
Either you have the answer, then it's like 10 stats. And if you don't have it, you lose the game. So, yeah, that's it.
But it's a card that the risk is on both sides of the board, right? Because you can play it, and if it's answered, and if your entire deck is surrounding that, then you're kind of screwed for the most part. Because if you're tailoring your deck to sort of build up a huge Imlerith, bring it back with Renew, take it out with Royal Decree, so you're essentially you're resorting to 3 gold cards to really have 1 gold card on access twice, all your buffs and all your stuff like that. So as much as if you don't have a counter to it, you're fucked. Well, if you do have an answer to it, they're fucked. So I think it's an okay card, because the risk is technically on both sides, and a lot of people are not necessarily running around without a mage to zap it off the board or something along those lines. And generally speaking, if it's early on and you have an answer to it, they drop it, whatever. Maybe you just pass and then save your answer for when it gets renewed, and you take it off the board then, and then they're screwed, right? Because they can't get it back.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like the fact that you lose games on the spot and you can do nothing if you don't draw Mandrake.
Do you think it has an impact in a competitive environment? Because, I mean, typically the decks that play it are kind of like more casual, memey, and often don't queue into like people trying to be more serious. Unless you're a pro ladder player, in which case you just queue into anything.
Yeah, the pro ladder, I think this season I lost already like 5 games to Imlerith. Because I didn't draw the Mandrake.
Well, that's got to be awful then. But I feel like that might be more of a system of pro ladders like no MMR problem rather than Sabbath himself. I mean, the card is kind of never going to be too much of an issue competitively, and you know, obviously it is a very binary state, and you could argue it should be limited in some way, I suppose. But at the same time, it's kind of like a what if scenario if gold weathers were like
if you don't
a
have
lot,
the answer. Yeah.
a lot more answerable. Yeah, I mean, it seems to me, and you know, you might disagree because it's definitely a card that, you know, has a very, you know, people don't like it, but it's like a gold weather done in a slightly better way. Because instead of needing a clear, you need removal, which is something that, you know, you typically have much more access to, right? Without having to like worry about, you know, having weather clears in your deck. It's kind of a gold weather with a much more healthier check condition.
Yeah. But the gold weather, you can like maybe bleed out in one round, or just have so big points that you don't care about the gold weather. But against Imlerit, you can't have enough points. If you have 10 million points, it will also get destroyed, right? So
because a gold weather at most is going to do 6 damage a turn, whereas Imlerith, if they can buff it up, you can't buff gold weather necessarily. The only way you can really affect a gold weather state on the other board is by moving your opponent's units around and getting maximum value for it. But a gold weather card could kind of, if you don't have a direct answer to it from a weather clear, you can always play around it by row stacking and kind of applying armor and in that sense. But something like Imlerith is, yeah, I can see how you make the you know, you're equating it to a gold weather card because, like, you know, they're on the board and they're going to do damage over time, and if they're not answered, they're going to get really oppressive. But you can't, like I said, you can't buff gold weather. You can buff Imlerith, and if you don't have an answer, you're essentially completely freaking boned, and then and it makes for a really disagreeable game.
Isn't Consume kind of like that in some ways as well?
Oh yeah,
definitely. I mean, we've had a lot of like kind of binary game states,
but Consume's not as polarizing as Imlerith Sabbath seems to be.
Yeah, you can still bleed the Consume maybe, and maybe like go in the top deck battle, and then they don't draw the Slicers or the Neckers. But against Imlerit, if you're
getting to top deck battle and they don't draw their Imlerith, and then you're fine.
Yeah. But you can't bleed them because they make 100 points out of one card. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind that. I understand why people are frustrated with it, but I can also see why people like it, you know. And people are suggesting, you know, put a timer on it or make it duel only every 2 turns or something. But the thing is, it's only got, when you play it, 7 strength? It's a 5 with 2 armor, so it's very clearable. You know, there's a lot of things that deal that sort of damage.
Personally, like, it's too gimmicky to be a real problem. I mean, of course, it could be a problem later in the game when there's kind of more support for it. But and that's super. Honestly, I probably would even make that argument. Like, something will probably eventually have to be done with this card, because eventually there will be a card that monsters can play that is like too good with this. Like, for example, if this card was Squirtle, it was like, what, that'd be ridiculous. But like, I think that right now the card is kind of too gimmicky to pose a real problem, except for in the case of Pro Ladder, which kind of needs an alternative solution. Because, like, I mean, even if, you know, you're, you know, queuing into it like every once in a blue moon, and maybe that game feels bad, I don't know. It's you're not really gonna like queue into it again in the same day, right?
Yeah, I think it's okay.
There's very few people playing it just as like a gimmick strategy.
But isn't Pro Ladder kind of like that anyway? You know, where people are running their gimmick decks, because like, only, 200 or so people actually in the Pro Ladder care about their MMR, or maybe a few more than that, you know. And the rest of them are in there are just like, I want to break from ranked. Let's play Shoop. And like, you know, you see people streaming, I'm playing Shoop in Pro Ladder. I'm playing Sabbath in Pro Ladder. And it's just like, because people are like, oh, look at this person taking this rubbish deck into a high level competitive environment. But it's at that point you realize that Pro Ladder is probably the most stressful environment in the world, just because literally your opponent could be playing anything.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's a bit of a flaw that Pro Ladder has always had, a lot of criticism, just because it's like it almost invites people that don't care about the MMR system to just queue into it as an alternative form of casual that's like more fun for them, but kind of ends up creating this really bad scenario for the players that actually do want to play Pro Ladder. And yeah, it can exemplify and really like really exacerbate issues with cards like Sabbath. But, you know, of course, just any kind of gimmicky strategy. Because you have to deck build really differently, right?
Yeah. And you also get the people who, you know, are in Pro Ladder and then don't want to get kicked out of Pro Ladder, so they're playing like the bare minimum numbers of games. And they don't really care about the outcome of those games. So then because they don't care about the outcome of those games, either they maybe play a lot of games with just stupid decks, or they go into them, play like half of them, and then like half the game then forfeit, so that they can stay in.
Well, the real issue is that Pro Ladder has a really broad meta, right? Pro Ladder has the broadest meta, and then ladders have a more narrow meta, particularly at the top, and then tournaments have probably an even narrower meta. The problem with Pro Ladder is that it's used for qualifying for tournaments, but it actually is less representative of a tournament meta than Ranked Ladder, right? It's kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. So it just ends up being a little awkward, and you do have to play and deck build at least minorly differently when you're considering Pro Ladder, right, GameKing?
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
But I think they made it to 50 games a season to stay in Pro Ladder. I think they changed that, right? And I'm not sure, like, they want to keep it more exclusive, I think, with that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they're, like, trying to improve it. They also, like, listened to some feedback. I think it was able for some players to give some feedback to the developers, how Pro Ladder should be improved, and I think it's okay-ish, yeah.
Yeah, I think it needs improving. Like, I have access to the Pro Ladder, and I just do not care about it whatsoever. Like, I got into the Pro Ladder the first time. Then that season, I played exactly, like, more or less enough games to stay, and then I realized, like, I don't actually care about this. Why am I doing this? So I let myself fall out. Then last season got GM, so I'm back in the Pro Ladder. And like, I'm like the kind of person who, you know, if I wanted to go like play competitive, like, it's good that I can get into Pro Ladder, but I don't care. Like, I'm not going to be playing in the Pro Ladder. I'm not going to be trying to get top 200. It's just not my goal in Gwent at all. But me having access gives me the opportunity to mess around in there, and that's not. Yeah. I feel like that shouldn't be the case because I've literally just said I don't care, right?
Yeah, but the problem is it incentivizes you to mess around in there, right? Because when you don't want to care about your MMR, when you're playing a jokey deck, but you want to play against more serious decks, you play Pro Ladder because it actually incentivizes you to do it instead of casual, and that's a real issue.
But then on the flip side, you can't make the entry to Pro Ladder so unobtainable that people aren't interested in trying, right? Like, because there will be also people who want to try. So you have to be able to get some people into the Pro Ladder. Like, it's a really difficult one because you can't really, like, how exclusive do you make it?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Maybe just some matchmaking in the Pro Ladder with, you have to have a certain MMR to, maybe you can get matched against people with plus or minus 50 MMR, and then you basically get matched against people at equal skill and not against someone who tries to troll at 1,100 MMR.
Yeah, I guess you need more matchmaking, but then that puts queue times up, and then you need a big enough player pool to allow for that sort of matchmaking, which is kind of counterintuitive for Pro Ladder when you want it to be limited to the best of the best.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's definitely kind of like an awkward system. I don't really see like a single simple solution. They would have to do some kind of overhaul, and I'm sure that they're gonna look into it and consider other options if they haven't already. Anyway, at this point, we should be able to move to viewer questions. If any of you guys have any questions for any of us in particular, Flake, GameKing, me, or Jaggerous, or us as a group, go ahead and type at Topdeck Gwent in chat. We'll answer your questions as we see them. Flake, GameKing, Jaggerous, if I cut you guys off short and there's anything else you wanted to talk about, as always, just pretend you saw that question in chat.
Oh, I was going to say, do you remember when Pro Ladder first came out and everyone was complaining that they didn't have access to Pro Ladder?
Yeah, because it was the new thing, and then everyone, like, what you said was exactly what happened. Like, everyone tried it out for like a few days and then just dropped it because they realized
I don't actually want to play 1,000 games in a month.
Well, this was it. I remember when it first hit, I was delayed by a few days, right? And I was a little bit upset because I had a few days that I was getting ready and geared up to go and jump in Pro Ladder as soon as it launched, and then it got delayed a few days, and I was away traveling for a couple of days, and when I got back, I'm like, all right, I'm 3 days behind. How many games is that? Like 100, 120 or something like that. And I looked, and I think I was about 400 games behind the guy who was at the top. And I was like, well, fuck life. It's over. Like, what am I supposed to do? I can't even put together 400 games in a week. I'm going to do it in, if you toss sleep out the equation, then, you just get hooked on some type of drug that's probably illegal, then maybe you can do it. Maybe I can change my life. It's just not, I don't condone that. Not at all.
Someone asked about arena meta. So this whole pass on blue coin, then your opponent passes on the second turn, and then you end up with a really long round 3 with no graveyard. Thoughts?
I don't mind that, actually. I think that's cool. I think that arena could even be 1 round.
I mean, it is.
Well, it is right now. Why not draft like a 15-card deck and just go down to 1 round? And if it's a coin flip and you get fucked, you get fucked. That's how it is. But otherwise, this whole shenanigan of just, okay, dry pass, play a card, dry pass, play a card. Let's go to round 3 with 13 cards in your hand. It's not it's nothing different.
Round play is so integral to Gwent.
it's integral to ranked Gwent, maybe when you get to choose.
I honestly can see your argument. Like, absolutely. Like, it's a fair point. Like, there's not really a real solution otherwise, is there? Like, you can't really stop bypassing.
Well, you take spies out of it, so there's going to be people wanting to not play on blue coin, and since there's no coin flip solution yet, it's going to be the whole dry pass fucking tango until you get to round 3, and you just dump all your cards in the best order that they present themselves, so to speak. So,
yeah, I mean, it does make some sense. I mean, if there's not really a solution to it, I could see an argument to limiting arena to 1 round. I mean, it might disincline people even more towards it, but that's kind of what it almost already is.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and as it goes on, like, yeah, I mean, I'm sure at this, I haven't played arena in like a week and a half. I'm sure at this point everyone's doing it. It's gotta be. And as it goes on, probably even only more people will start doing it. So.
Well, it's gotten to the point where if you're playing a game and you get red coin and someone plays into their blue coin, you're like, fucking got you. Like, it's just like, all right, advantage play kind of thing. And a lot of people, once you hit that 7, 8, 9 row, like you're playing your 7th, 8th, or 9th game, a lot of people are less inclined to play into the first 2 rounds. They'll play for the long 3rd round, depending on what their decks are, because they usually have a shoop or they'll have tons of weather or weather clear, because their deck has been powerful enough to get there. But yeah, I mean, 1 round arena, let's do it. Fuck it, why not?
Chat saying make arena 5 rounds. Just 4 more dry passes.
I like playing like round 1.
Well, that's what it's going to be, right? Then you're dumping like 2 or 3 bronze shit cards instead of just 1. So
yeah, this is instead of doing that thing that people were like, where you draft like you draft, I don't know, like 40 cards and thin it down to 25. We'll just make arena longer so that in the first 4 rounds you can throw away your terrible cards. Just in this dry pass kind of situation until you get to the final round. So instead of doing the thinning in the deck builder, you do the thinning in the first 4 rounds, and then we're good.
I have a question for you, Swim. What do you think about removing all the spies from the game, from the entire game?
This is something that I've given a ton of thought to, GameKing. I think that in the past, it's actually been something that I've kind of liked as a solution. I think that the game kind of doesn't really need spies, and especially when I played Arena, I didn't really miss them. At the same time, I think spies are kind of only piggybacking off of the larger issue, which is the coin flip. I would rather see spies stay in the game and the coin flip be resolved in some way. That's my optimal solution. I don't really like the idea of like over deletion because they are interesting and I don't think they pose a huge problem outside of the coin flip. What do you think, GameKing?
I think I would remove them because spies nowadays is everything. Every deck almost plays the spy, right? Yeah. And what happens usually is you play the spy, your opponent plays the counter spy, and only if you don't have the spy and your opponent has it, then you maybe then you maybe lose the game. And if you just remove them, then it's not dependent if both players draw them, the spies, or not. So
at the same time, there was a meta in the past that was relatively early in closed beta, where spies, hilariously enough, this was back when cards across the board were worth like 40 or 50, 30 or 40% less than they are now, right? They were worth a lot less, and spies were like 14 points, right? Mm-hmm. Hilariously enough, they're actually better now. They're 13 points. But, I mean, reasonably speaking, it's proven in the past that if it's a higher point margin, then they become a lot less auto-include. There was a point in time, I don't know if you guys all played like this early on, but there was a point in time where spies were having a good balance. They weren't auto-include. In fact, they were ran in, I think, a minority of decks for a short period, back when they were like 14 points.
Yeah, they used to be like quite high points, and points were much smaller, so it wasn't the case where you could easily catch a spy. Whereas now it's like you play a spy and you're kind of fairly certain that they can make it up, or you're going to get better value. Like, you're going to get more than the 13 value out of your spy a lot of the time. That wasn't the case, like a year ago. So then they weren't as prevalent. So I think they've been a little bit subject to power creep, making them more of a problem. But then as you make spies bigger, that kind of leads into its own problems of cards like Scorch and those kind of things, and Dunbanner. And also cards that eat from the graveyard, so like Osril and Ghoul and stuff. If you make spies bigger, that they get buffed, and so it's kind of become more and more of a problem. I wouldn't mind them being removed, but I think it's kind of funny that GameKing has said on this talk show that he wants Dunbanner, Elven Mercs, and Card Advantage spies to be removed. Like, it's a little bit telling.
Like two free cards: Light Cavalry, War Dancer, and Spies removed from the game, and then it's
Sabbath
better
too.
than. Yeah, and
Don't
that's
Sabbath, sure.
I don't know.
What else?
I think that you have to be very careful going a little too trigger happy with removal as like a go-to option. It's very tempting to do, but in the long term, you can end up with a game that feels a little too linear or stale, right?
So,
I don't know.
what
Like
you're saying is we should just give them completely different effects to what they have now. So then they're not technically removed from the game. They're, I don't know, reworked.
remove Gwent from the game.
Oh, we're taking it a little bit too far here. But
I have a solution for the coin flip that will also make Rose relevant. We play rock, paper, scissors, but we call
my
it
God.
melee range siege. I think that CDPR should just give me a job right now. Like, don't you want to play a little game of melee range siege right before you play Gwent?
people are just gonna play that. There's gonna be tournaments just for that. They're just gonna be like, "Fuck it, okay, I won," and just forfeit, and then have like ranking
we can
systems
play right
for
now.
that.
Like, okay, so this can be melee, this can be ranged, and this can be siege.
that's just rock,
Ready?
paper, scissors. Wait,
Yeah,
Okay,
hold on
3,
a
2,
second.
1, go, Swim.
Nobody owns the rights to rock, paper, and
Twitch.
scissors. Okay.
Who's playing? Is it
which
just
one
me?
beats which?
There's 4 of us. One of us is gonna get fucking screwed out of something.
Oh well, it doesn't matter. Everyone's in, and it's 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, ready? 3,
Yes.
2,
2,
1,
1.
go.
Up. Fuck.
What are you guys doing?
Okay, you delete.
Double fucking scissors. Double scissors.
Couple scissors? What the hell?
Yeah.
Wait, Flake's out
Couple
because he didn't
scissors.
pick an actual thing. Right, try again.
That is the thing.
Flake, you're out.
You say that
Okay,
shit
ready?
on the west side. On the west side. I swear to God.
Are you ready?
Okay. Are we doing it again?
Yep.
Oh, for fuck's sake. All right. When
You're
in
gonna do
doubt.
this winner?
Yep.
Oh god. I thought
1, 2, 3, go.
Oh,
Oh, GameKing's out. We all smushed him.
oh god, what the hell is happening?
this show has essentially just completely gone. Why don't we just flip coins now on this game?
Well no, GameKing's out. Now it's the 3 of us.
Okay, ready? 1,
Okay.
2, 3, go. Oh, we all went paper.
Did we all go paper?
You can't have
GameKing, you're out.
Yeah.
your
Also,
hand.
no, I was saluting my opponents. I was not prepared. What I meant to say was scissors again. All
Okay,
right.
last round. Winner takes all.
let's-
Otherwise, it's a
Oh my
tie.
god! All right, fine. Let's do one more.
And everyone loses 300 and a half.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, go. Oh, Swim's out.
Okay.
So,
So,
right, Flake, come on,
Jaggerous,
decider. We gotta do it. Ready?
All right,
1,
ready?
2, 3,
3,
go.
I win. Perfect.
Oh, you win.
Fucking- I'm on the
There you
pro
go.
ladder for there's a pro ladder for rock paper scissors.
What are you
Okay,
doing?
I'm on it. I made it. It's good. I've just hit Grandmaster rock paper scissors. This
I
is the
think
best
I-
talk show of all time.
I-
This is fucking prime time shit right here. Fucking
It's
sweeps.
actually melee range siege.
Pardon me.
Get it right.
No, that's the expansion set. The expansion set is going to be rock paper. We can't say those things.
GameKing, are you playing in the qualifier this weekend?
For anyone in chat, this
Yes.
is a team talk show, by the way.
Are you looking forward to not playing Adzakov Tailbot like 3 times?
Yeah. This time, yeah, we'll try again, and maybe, hopefully, I will make it this time. Kappa.
Well, hopefully. For those of you who don't know, GameKing had to play against Tailbot. Was it 3 times in the last
Yeah.
qualifier?
Yeah, in the
Like in the
winners,
Swiss, in the winners bracket, and in the losers bracket, or something like
yeah,
that?
the winners bracket, in the losers final, and in the Swiss stage. Yeah.
So there you go. But that's this weekend. So if you're a top 200, take part. We'll find out who wins at the end of the weekend. And we should probably end this now before we start playing rock, paper, scissors
Oh,
again.
yeah, so
I was just
shout-
going to get some Monopoly and we could just start throwing dice in an alley or something.
Oh my god. Please. Okay, guys. Shoutouts, closing statements. Where can we find you, lovely people? Who would you like to shout out? Flake.
Hey, well, first of all, I just want to thank you for bringing me on the show. It's always a pleasure. I've never really spoken to Game King, but he looks very comfortable in his Turkish bathhouse there, or wherever the hell he is, in that sauna pit that he's living in, which is really cool, in his cabin in the woods. But I appreciate it. You can find me on Twitter at WatchFlake, on Twitch at www.twitch.tv/WatchFlake. And I just want to make a shameless shout out going out to the Wild Hunt 2 tournament, which is happening on June 16th and 17th. It is wilder. It is huntier. It is going to be a huge deal. I promise you that. So keep an eye out for that. You can follow at Wild Hunt Gwent on Twitter for all the details on that. And that's the gist of it for me, I suppose.
How much huntier is it?
Oh my God. Like 0.75 huntier right now, but we've taken that huntiness and we've invested in low risk mutual funds. So we're expecting a solid investment return on this.
Stop saying hunting.
Game King, do you have any shout outs or anything for us, man?
Okay, shout outs to Tailbot, Freddy Babes, and Arzikov.
All people I've mentored. These are all people I've mentored in Gwent.
I will qualify through the open qualifier, and then I will annihilate you at the Okay, yeah, and you can follow me at Twitch, GameKing HS. Yeah, that's it.
What's the HS stand for?
On Solo.
Heart Magic. No. Yeah, Hearthstone. I used to
Swim,
play
any
Hearthstone.
shout-outs?
Yes, I would like to give a shout out to this is not really a shout out, it doesn't count. Basically, Jaggerous and I are starting a bit of we want to do it eventually weekly, but it's going to be basically a series on the Topdeck YouTube where Jaggerous and I are going to be going through submitted clips of just crazy, funny, or top plays that happen in Gwent. If you guys have any plays yourself or see anything that's like Twitch clipped or anything from anywhere that you'd like to submit, you can send it as an email to clips@topdeck.pro.
Yeah, do that. Do that. Seems good. Also, I got to shout out someone in chat. I'll shout out Kawai Kokoro, who was my GM mentor during Trial of the Grasses. So shout outs to you for being awesome and Dutch, both of which are great. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully we'll catch you next week. Hope everyone has a lovely evening. Thanks to Flake and GameKing for coming on the show, and also for indulging me in my game of Melee Range Siege.